What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you my preview and my official prediction on the 2024 SEC Football Conference Championship game matchup between the Georgia Bulldogs and the Texas Longhorns. So this is my last Power 4 conference preview and prediction for these conference championship games coming up this weekend. I did the ACC on Monday, Tuesday I did the Big Ten, and then yesterday I did the Big 12. So now we're closing things out here with the SEC, and then tomorrow, right after this video, for tomorrow's video, I'm going to give you my playoff predictions, my final playoff predictions at what I think the playoff field is going to look like based on my conference championship predictions, and also for the other 12 teams. So that's it. That's what the schedule is going to be coming up for tomorrow, but we're going to do this preview and prediction on this SEC championship matchup. I'm going to give you the stats here for both of these teams, give you a preview of this game and what time the game will be, and also we'll see who the favorite in this game is, and we'll see what the FBI is saying about this game as well, and then we'll take a look at both teams' previous 5 games from the regular season, from the month of November, and then also at the end of this video, I'm going to give you my official prediction of how I think the game is going to go down. So let's go ahead and jump right into it for our SEC Conference Championship preview and prediction. Again, it's Georgia versus Texas in a rematch from the regular season. We'll start here with stats for both of these teams. We'll start with the Georgia Bulldogs first in points per game. This team is averaging about 34.1 points per game. Total yards per game overall on the offensive side of the football. This team averaging about 425.3 yards on offense this year per game. Passing yards per game pretty high for this Georgia team at 297 yards. Rushing yards per game for Georgia, it's pretty average, about 128.3 yards per rushing on the ground. So yeah, just a pretty average number there for Georgia. This is more of a passing attack team. Of course, you got a guy like Carson Beck that throws the football a lot. And again, this is a Georgia team that doesn't really run the football that much. On the defensive side of the football, in passing yards allowed and rushing yards allowed, passing yards allowed first, they're giving up about 196.3 yards of passing in the secondary. So that's not a bad number for Georgia's secondary, but then you look at the rushing yards, that's not a bad number either, giving up 136.4 yards of rushing on the ground. And then you look at both sides of the football and the rankings for Georgia, and Georgia's offense is not really the same as it was from last year. We've seen all year long this Georgia offense have a lot of ups and downs. At times they look really good and sometimes they don't really look good. They're inconsistent sometimes on the offensive side of the football. And that's probably why the offensive ranking is at 37th. Again, this has not been one of the most explosive offenses this year that Georgia had compared to last year. So the offense is about average. It's just outside the top 30. And then defensively, this is not kind of the same defense either that they had for the last 3 years. You kind of expect a top 10 defense when you have Kirby Smart as your head coach, but the defense is also pretty average. But this is still a very talented team. That defense, of course, is just outside the top 30 as well. So yeah, both offensively and defensively in the rankings for Georgia, it's pretty even, but the defensive ranking is at 36. So let's now go to Texas's stats, as that was the stats there for Georgia. For Texas, they're also averaging about 34.8 points per game. So a slight advantage there for Texas in the points per game average, almost close to 35. Total yards per game for this Texas offense, averaging about 450.1 yards per total yards this year on the offensive side of the football. Passing yards per game, 274.6 yards per passing. Rushing yards per game, this is a Texas offense that's pretty balanced and pretty explosive. This team averaging just about 175.5 yards per rushing. This is also kind of like more of a passing attack team, but they'll run the football sometimes, and they're pretty good at running the football a little bit as well. Defensively for Texas, this is where the numbers are really good for Texas. The defensive side of the football, passing yards allowed, they're giving up just about 143.7 yards per passing. And then on rushing yards on the ground, they're giving up just 103.8 yards per rushing on the ground. So this is a team that can really stop the running game pretty well. And then offensively and defensively in the rankings for Texas, they're both really good. 14th on offense, just outside the top 10, but just inside the top 15. So yeah, this is a very explosive offense that can really score points. And then defensively in the rankings, that's their biggest strength. They're third on defense, so this is a top 5 defense in the country, and they're also the top defense in the SEC. So stat comparison-wise between these two teams, points per game, they're both averaging the same amount of points per game. Total yards per game is pretty even. Texas just with a slight advantage, though. Passing yards per game, Georgia has an advantage there. You got really two good quarterbacks here with Carson Beck from Georgia, and then you got Quinn Ewers from Texas. Both of these guys have gone face-to-face with each other once on the season so far. And then rushing yards, Texas has a big advantage there. Again, like I said, Georgia's pretty average at running the football, and then Texas sometimes will run the football a lot, but sometimes they'll pass the football a little bit more. And then on defense, Texas has a big advantage on the defensive side of the football. The rushing yards allowed, though, is almost pretty even, but the passing yards, that's a big advantage allowed there for Texas. And then offensively and defensively in the rankings, both sides of the football, Texas has a big advantage there. So those are the stat comparisons here between these two teams. Let's now get into the full preview of this SEC championship game. Again, it's going to be Georgia versus Texas here in the SEC Championship on Saturday. And this will be at 4 o'clock Eastern Time on ABC. So this will be the second game out of that triple header there between all the teams in the Power 4 Conference Championships. You got Arizona State and Iowa State, like I mentioned yesterday. That game will be the first game on ABC. And then you got the ACC Championship game coming up at 8 o'clock. Of course, this game is going to be in Atlanta, just like the SEC Championship game always is. And the spread is going in favor of Texas here by 2.5 points. And the over and under is at 49.5. So we're kind of not expecting a high-scoring game according to the over and under. But again, you got Texas favored here in this one for the second time in a row. And like I said, the storylines in this game, you got Georgia and Texas here in the second time in a rematch from the regular season. The last time these two teams went against each other, it was back on October the 19th in the middle of October. And Georgia won that game 30-15, so a fairly easy win for Georgia in that first game, mainly because of their defense. That was just mainly the reason why they won that game. Because if you look at that first matchup, Georgia's offense got off to a really slow start. They also ran the football really good against this Texas defense. That was kind of the difference there. And that was probably the biggest strength on the offensive side of the football. For Texas, this is a revenge game for them. I mean, obviously, they want to win this game to kind of secure that number 2 spot in the college football playoff. But if Georgia wins, they'll secure that number 2 spot in the college football playoff. So both of these teams are playing, for maybe a first-round bye in the playoff. I mean, if you lose this game, you're probably going to have to play a first-round game. But it will be a home game either way. If both of these teams, host a first-round playoff game, even if they lose this SEC championship. You got two really good coaches here, Kirby Smart and Steve Sarkisian. They met each other once already. And then you got really two good quarterbacks, two really good defensive teams, and just overall plenty of talent around both sides of the football. Now you look at the FBI. They give Texas a big advantage here, which is really surprising by a big percentage. The FBI gives Texas about a 61.5% chance of beating Georgia and winning the conference championship. That is a big number there. And then for Georgia, it's only at 38.5%. That's not a big number for Georgia. And Georgia, again, is an underdog here against Texas. They were an underdog in the first game. They're an underdog here in this conference championship. This time playing in Atlanta. It's not in Austin, like how that first game was. It's going to be in Atlanta. I feel like there's going to be more Georgia fans here, but Texas fans will definitely show up to this game. But yeah, Georgia is an underdog here. We've seen them prove people wrong this year in some of these big games. Some of those big games, they weren't able to win them. But yeah, Georgia, they're not just trying to prove people wrong here. They're trying not to prove the fans wrong. They're also trying to prove the FBI wrong because they're a big underdog according to the FBI as well. But yeah, this game will be at 4 o'clock Eastern Time on ABC. Texas, again, favored by 2.5, and the over and under sitting at 49.5. Let's now take a look at the previous game comparisons here for both of these teams. We'll start with the Georgia Bulldogs. Again, they come in with a record of 10-2. Their second loss, besides the Ole Miss game, which I'll get to in just a moment. They lost to Alabama back in the month of September. That was on September 28th. They lost that game 41-34, and they nearly came back in that game. Remember, Georgia was trailing by a lot in that game, and, that kind of told us that maybe the offense really isn't good for Georgia in that game, but they nearly came back in that game, so got to give them the credit there. They didn't really lose that game by a good amount, so they only lost that game like 41-34. But looking at their previous 5 games here, back on November 2nd in the first weekend of the month of November, they defeated rival Florida in Jacksonville 34-20. Yeah, not a big win there for Georgia. DJ Lagway was giving some problems to the Georgia defense, and if DJ Lagway probably did not get hurt in that game, I feel like Florida probably would have had a chance to pull off the upset, but Georgia ended up winning there at the end of the day, pulled away late in the fourth quarter. They win at 34-20. Then they lost on the road here at Ole Miss 28-10 back on November 9th, and like I mentioned, in that game, after that game, Georgia, that was probably their worst game that they played all year long. So, yeah, Ole Miss really crushed them on the defensive side of the football. And the offense, the Georgia secondary just could not really keep up with this Ole Miss offense. And also these receivers. So that was a big loss there for Georgia. And then they beat Tennessee here to bounce back, though, 31-17. That was kind of an important win there for Georgia. That was kind of a battle there, because Ole Miss obviously kind of slipped up down the stretch, and it looked like Ole Miss probably could make the conference championship. But yeah, this is a game that probably decided who was going to make it to Atlanta. But yeah, Georgia took care of business against Tennessee 31-17. I was really impressed with the offense in this game and impressed with the defense. They defeated UMass pretty easily 59-21 on November 23rd. And then, of course, this past Friday had that 8 overtime game against rival Georgia Tech, 44-42. Boy, Georgia looked like they were going to lose this game. Georgia Tech had so many chances on 2-point conversions in order to pull off the upset, but Georgia does survive. They beat Georgia Tech this past Friday night, 44-42. Again, that game going into 8 overtimes. Let's now get into Texas's previous 5 games. They defeated Vanderbilt first off back on October 26th. In the month of October, they defeated them 27-24. So yeah, a close game there, but Vanderbilt's been really competitive against some of the top teams in the SEC this year. And then after that game, Texas got a bye week. They defeated Florida, coming out of the bye week 49-17 on November 9th. Defeated Arkansas here on the road 20-10. The defense, I thought, played really dominant in that game. The offense just wasn't really getting things going in that one. And then Kentucky, they defeated them here on November 23rd, 31-14. And then they defeated rival Texas A&M this past Saturday night, 17-7. And again, the defense pretty much was the difference. Texas A&M and Arkansas games are pretty similar for Texas. Their defense kind of made the difference in those 2 games. And maybe like Vanderbilt as well, even though they gave up 24 points in that game. This defense has been a lot better ever since, the Georgia game, and they haven't really given up, 30 points since that first game. So previous game comparison-wise here, Georgia's had a much tougher schedule compared to Texas. Georgia's had 3 tough road games on the schedule, even that home game against Tennessee and Georgia Tech. They had to play Ole Miss on the road, Alabama on the road, and then Texas, of course, in that first matchup. So Georgia's played a very tough schedule, but they were really lucky, to get that win over Tennessee, and then also really lucky to win that first matchup against Texas. And then for Texas, they haven't really had a tough schedule this year. They played Michigan in the non-conference in week number 2, but that was a pretty easy win. And then obviously the Georgia game was probably their toughest game there that they had in the month of October. And then Texas A&M this past weekend, that was a tough game, but they were able to win it just thanks to their defense. So that's a look at the previous game comparisons. Let's now get to my prediction here for the Georgia versus Texas rematch in the SEC championship game. Again, this is how I predicted it in the preseason. I did predict Georgia to beat Texas in that first game, and then Georgia again to defeat Texas in the preseason SEC championship game. So yeah, I think this is going to be another great matchup here between 2 talented teams. Again, you got 2 very talented coaches that are future Hall of Famers. You got Steve Sarkisian with his offensive background, and then defensively for Georgia, you got Kirby Smart with his defensive background. And you got 2 really good quarterbacks. Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers going at it. I think this is going to be a battle here between whoever has the better offense. Defensively, both of these teams I think are pretty even in talent-wise, but Texas definitely has a slight advantage on the defensive side of the football. I think both teams will probably try to pass the football a little bit more than probably running the football, to be honest, because I don't think running the football in both of these defenses is really going to work out. So I think both teams, it's going to definitely come down to the passing game for both quarterbacks. I think this game is not really similar to the first game. I think it's a lot closer. Texas just really struggled against the Georgia defense last time, but I think they'll be ready for this one. But when it comes to these postseason games, I do trust Kirby Smart and this Georgia coaching staff, and I just feel like this Georgia team is just more prepared when it comes to like these postseason games. And plus, Georgia lost last year in the SEC championship, so I think it's kind of like a redemption season for the Bulldogs. They've been through a lot, and I think Carson Beck probably has his best game, up to date. So I think Georgia beats Texas here in the rematch, and I know it's kind of hard to beat a team like 2 times in a row, but I think Georgia does that. They beat Texas here 21-17 in the SEC Conference Championship game. So I'm going Georgia Bulldogs here, and I think with this victory, you're going to see them here at that number 2 seed for me coming up in my playoff predictions. That's coming out tomorrow. But that is my 2024 SEC Conference Championship game prediction. Let me guys know what you think about this prediction, and give me your prediction for this SEC Conference title game down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.